Abstract art does not attempt to represent an accurate depiction of a visual reality, but instead uses shapes, colors, forms, and gestural marks to achieve its effect. This piece attempts to utilize palette knives to recreate a sea turtle. Therefore, it is a representational form of abstraction, as the turtle is a form that is obvious to humans as something that already exists in our world. Palette knives can abstract work a bit due to their shape as well as how colors mix or stay solid as an artist uses them. Before I started this painting, I obtained my reference image and then mixed the different colors of paint I decided to use for this painting. If I had wanted to abstract this image even more, I could have used really wild, non-representational colors for the turtle, like fluorescent pink and purple, for example. After the colors were mixed, I was able to start painting. I used the back side of a masonite board because the masonite already had a texture on that side, and I wanted to play with the way the palette knife, paint, and texture of the board reacted to each other as I was painting. I also combined a turquoise blue and a deeper phthalo blue to create the depth in the water for this image that I could see in the reference photo. As I worked, I continued to add paint and mix the colors until I liked the textural marks created. I also tried to keep the lighter and darker colors similar to the reference image. Here I used two types of blue-green at the same time, so I was able to mix the colors together and use the palette knife to add and remove them in order to create a transition from light to dark in the background. I also used those blues and hunter green in order to create the rocks and vegetation, as well as the darker reflection above the turtle. In order to use my time well, I started another painting while I was waiting for the background of this piece to dry. In about 10 to 20 minutes, I was able to use white chalk pastel to create an outline and larger details such as the flippers and head for the turtle. I used white chalk pastel because I like the way I can wipe off any residual marks without affecting my work or the paint color that I'm using. After the outlines were blocked onto the canvas, I took the white sand beach color from a different painting and used that to fill in the color for the body of the turtle. That color was made by adding yellow oxide to a lot of white. When I thought that color was where I wanted it, I started to use a khaki color, green with a little brown or yellow oxide in it, to start creating the contrast needed for the underside of the belly of the turtle. I then added some burnt sienna where I could see darker parts of the pattern on the turtle's shell. The next time I sat down to paint, it was a few days later, and I realized that I didn't really like what was painted before, so I used the palette knife to repaint more of the off-white sand color onto the majority of the turtle because I noticed that the color was under almost everything else in the reference photo. As that color was drying, I started using the burnt umber to add even more contrast where I could see the darkest shadow, in part of the back flipper and on the left larger flipper and eye of the turtle. I then started to use the hunter green that I created using hooker's green and burnt umber to create the green pattern of circles and ovals in the turtle's head and flippers. I also used a tiny amount of that color to differentiate the neck from the body. I then began to use a golden brown, which was a mix of yellow oxide and burnt sienna for the majority of the shell. As I continued to add that brown, I also used the burnt umber to create contrast between the bulbous part of the shell and the edge of the shell. During the final part of the painting, I used each of the different colors on the edge and tip of the palette knife to create small details in the head, neck, and shell to finish the painting. I also used the flatter side of the palette knife to add more green to the patterned part of the shell. The important thing to note during each layer of paint is that the palette knife will create a texture on each layer, allowing only some of the next layer of paint to adhere to parts of the canvas. You as the artist must figure out how to manipulate the palette knife to create the values and edges between each object or parts of objects. An important thing to remember when using palette knives is to think about where the edge of the knife is in relation to the edge of the object you are trying to paint. This painting actually took about an hour to paint.